All right. Systems, by definition, is not, systems sometimes is stated as an overall approach to a given problem. Now what the hell does that mean? Does that mean the health of the people involved in a working plan? It could. The systems mean that there's no shutdown of the railway system or transportation system? It certainly doesn't mean that. So a system cannot be valid or adequate unless the system is controlled that thoroughly. Is there anyone that doesn't understand what that means? A system would mean if you had a boat here and the boat crossed the river and it docked, there can be a system for docking the boat. There can be men standing here. And there can be a system for moving that boat in waters where a big boat can't maneuver. So they use a tugboat at this end and sometimes at the rear end, and the tugboats attempt to turn that boat and guide it into port, or they lock onto this end and steer it in. The next part of this system is men throw ropes and they tie them. And then the next part, they press a button that turns either a mechanical or electrical winch that tightens up the boat. That's a hand tool system. The other systems would be a boat, and this is the docking area, with an underwater guidance system, whether it be sonar that's on center. And once the sonar is on center, lined up with another reference point back here, the boat is brought in automatically, and its distance from this point is based on what they call the Doppler effect, the feedback of sound underwater, any underwater acoustical resonance system, or of a system running between the buildings. So as it moves, it breaks that system, and so its speed is governed and automatically. Now, a systems approach could include the docking system as a systems approach. The unloading system is another system. So in unloading, they used to do this. And those of you that know a little bit about boats, they used to have a gadget, some boats still do, and they had a hatch that they opened, and they just picked up huge sections and turned the crane ashore and they dropped it. Then they moved to a better system. They used to have trucks, like the old Mack truck, and they used to open the doors here and wheel in the cargo in the early days, just empty the cargo. Now they're up to this system, where they take the whole truck body and put it on top of the boat. And then the boat launches the truck carriage onto a wheel system. You understand? All right. In the harbor systems that I had there, the boat itself in the future will be a system. The boats, those of you that don't remember it, it's called the harbor system. This is the harbor system. But the harbor system has this boat, which is an automation plant. And so when it picks up the raw material, say in Africa, it runs it through a production line and finishes it as near to a finished product as possible while it's crossing the sea, so there's no downtime. When you turn off a computer, you don't save a goddamn thing because it doesn't need rest. Flesh and blood needs rest. But a machine, when it's turned off, is socially offensive. Like if I've got one automobile factory running 24 hours continuously, then I've got twice as much production time. All right, now, the ship is never down. The only thing that's down is the personnel. We don't want them on there. Get rid of them as soon as possible. So the ship is a constantly operating system. Okay, when the ship docks, which is docked automatically, there's a service crane. I don't know if you can see it. There's this gadget that looks like it has windows on it. It travels up and back between the buildings, like that. And then when not in use, it goes flush back into the system. The service crane unloads this whole area, lifts out units that are brought forth and loaded onto carriages of trains, the transportation system, whether it be magnetic induction, when it lowers the whole train unit onto the carrier track. Okay, the system, in order to operate effectively, depends on how much of the interacting variables are controlled, including the weather, the sea, and everything else. So we always think in terms of limited aspects of a system. The engineering department might, the systems engineers might put all the drafting tables in this position, on the top view. Then later on they put them in this position, so they take up less space. You ever see a vertical drafting table? Do you have them now? They're vertical, and your automatic drafting machine slides along, so it takes up less space and you get a full face view. when you're doing drafting and the table's at some angle to your eye, you can't really get a good view of your drawing, but you turn it to some position where the drawing doesn't fall off. Another portion of the system is that in some instances, they take the paper to the table, which is a bad system. An electrostatic edge at both ends, which you turned on and charged will hold the drafting paper flat to the table, especially if it's an electret. You flip the switch and it becomes an electret and holds the paper. An electret paper holds it. Then I'm running through systems. If anybody doesn't know what I mean by that? Sort of a piece of plastic, the rubber paper will stick to it.
Well, what you mean by systems is at the moment the most efficient way to do it. That would be superseded.
Or not the most efficient way, the most efficient, accessible way.
So, I mean, accessible
You know what that
now.
means? Yeah. There's the most efficient way to do a thing, and then the most efficient way with what's accessible, what's available to you. Okay. So society, as you take this system and then surpass this system, you come into an XYZ plotter that draws the plans. You don't have a draftsman. The engineer or the person, what you call the inventor, types in what they want and the drawing is made.
That's what they have now.
All right. That's a system too. The next thing is we have a multiple system that does all the drafting that has to be done in the area, in different areas related to a given subject at once. So instead of waiting for the plan, the floor plan, and the building plan, a statement is made about the portions of the object, and then a lot of little plans are engineered in accordance with the general problem. Then all those things are microphotographed and stored. That's another kind of system. If this system is interconnected with the building systems, and it can order material while it's drawing the plans, after it draws the plans, it runs a coordinated check. You know, let me see if this pipe fits with the other. But sometimes in the world of reality, there's what they call a mock-up. Is there anybody who doesn't know what that means? Well,
Miniature scale model.
no, they're full size. They make a full-size model of a cabin, of an airplane or a rocket ship. So they make a model like that. And they put all the instruments there to see in the planning stages, and the guy can reach all the controls, that they're within reach. And then in the side view, when you got the fire extinguisher here, you know, you got it here. Where is it? On the top view, it might be indicated that it's here, but then you can't open the door. So they build a door that has bow and mock-up, and they put in the fire extinguisher to see if you can get out. Because if you make drawings of all your electrical lines running through the plane, it may interfere with the opening of the door. So they build a big mock-up to make sure that these things will fit. Then you call in the instrument man and say, look, can you see all the instruments? When you get to them, does it look all right? That's again. Then you call the test pilot in. He sits in the mock-up, and he moves. They're real controls. And everything. Mock-up is made of wood. But the stuff that and instruments are real. He moves them around. How do you like the view from the cabin? He says, great, great. But don't forget, he's orthodox, the test pilot. He just looks at it as a test pilot. Okay. He's not a systems man. He says, the instruments are great, see? Then they call in the flight engineer, and he looks at it. Then they call in the serviceman. And they say, sir, can you service these instruments? Everything look all right? They call in one man after the other. One of the guys that they call in last is the structure man. He says, is there enough structure in that plane, in that mock-up, to support all that stuff? And he looks at it, he says, yes, no, whatever it is, so we have to modify this. Then you call in the weapons department. I'm talking about now you get in a military plane. He says, you've got a lot of instruments there, but no room for a 1-pound cannon, which we want out here. And we need a little more room for a new radar system, which has been developed. Bigger, hope, heaven. So they change the mock-up. And finally, once they put the stamp on it, they start building it. Now in building it, they take it out and they try it. The guy flies it around. He says, well, I don't like the way it handles on the left. When it cuts around a bend, one of the controls flutter. See, that's an actual system. But someday, this will be connected with the mock-up system. Instead of building a mock-up, this is a very difficult thing to picture now. If I build a half a mock-up, and I use a lens or a mirror system, I can throw the other half into it. If you build half a modern airplane, here's a bad drawing of half a modern airplane, sticking out this way, see? And put it against a mirror, you'll get a simulated whole airplane. You understand what I'm saying? All right. If you're going to do 27 apartment buildings that look like this, and they're all to be spaced at 200 feet apart. Or you can build 2 or 3 and then put a mirror behind it at a certain distance, and you'll get a ad infinitum view of apartment houses going to infinity. But, not to infinity, but you get a duplication of what you've got here. But if you wanted an infinite amount, in other words, we want to shoot a movie with a transoceanic tunnel with 10 million circumferences going back into the, and the train coming from way back there, we would build about 10 rings of the tunnel or 5, a real segment of the tunnel, like that. Then we put a mirror back here. But the mirror would only give you, if this has got 5 rings, it'll give you 5 rings and then stop. So you put another mirror in front, which has 10% silver on it, and it does a reflection of the 5-ring system in this surface, and then trans-reflects it back to the other surface. You get an infinite amount of rings. Everybody doesn't understand that? You got to be able to see through that mirror. Okay. Now this is simulation, which is very important to systems thinking. Simulation means for better visual emphasis and studying, a model is required. In overall systems that I always try to talk about here, overall systems thinking has another dimension which isn't talked about in any of the books that I have seen on systems thinking. It always assumes that a system could be worked out within known parameters. That means the areas that you're concerned with. When you build housing for people, is there sufficient plumbing, ventilation in the building? How many cubic feet of air per minute pass through the main auditorium? You're taking all the parameters and the areas. I'm going what looks like a circular city, but that merely is an indication of the parameters or the needs, all of the needs. And you take all those things in that you're aware of, which is all you can do. And then you develop your city around usually a known system, bricks, prefabricated wall. But what systems doesn't do is what we're always interested in. Instead of taking a lot of conventionals, which look like this, a conventional system is a lot of steel tubes, usually stainless, if you're familiar with this, which I talk about occasionally. If you put a Coke bottle or a 10-gallon water jug and you want to fill it up, this machine, these pipes come down and the water is poured in under pressure. And those bottles fill up, like 6 or 7 at a time, or 8 at a time. They come down, boom. Now you got a problem. When you fill a bottle real fast, the air has to get out. If you designed a nozzle that came to a giant water container, like that, and the water moved in real fast, it would blow that top off. So they have 2 tubes, one inside the other. One creates as high a vacuum as that bottle can stand. And the force of the vacuum draws the water. You think you know what I mean? The middle tube sucks the air out. It's one pipe inside the other. And it goes into the bottle. Then it has a seal on top. This one creates a suction and sucks all the air out. When most of the air is sucked out of the bottle, that draws the fluid in. Is that clear? As the fluid fills up, it reaches the top of that tube, and it doesn't have enough vacuum to suck the fluid up, so it stops automatically. So the bottle, real fast, they fill up these big bottles, and Coke bottles are filled that way, and perfume bottles. Now, when you look at that system, you think, Jesus Christ, that's great. That's a great system. It may be, or it may not be. Is a bottle necessary? Is a bottle a remnant of the price system, Coke bottles? Maybe we need another system. What industry doesn't do, and what systems engineers don't do, is they arrange known machines. They go through the latest handbook of packaging, and they take the known machines and line them up, and all those machines are designed like a post office, for example. During the war, they wanted a lot of information across the ocean. And since you had millions of men in the army, that was a hell of a lot of mail. It would take a lot of paperwork. Well, they used to do this. I know about World War II. I don't know about the Korean War. I don't even know about Vietnam War. They used to photograph letters. They used to open letters you wrote to your boyfriend and photograph it. And they make a microfilm. And they send this microfilm overseas and then duplicate it. You think you know what I mean? So anybody doesn't know what that means? You never really received a personal letter until about World War II. Because they don't want to lug that shit. Now, on a 35 millimeter film today, you can get probably 500 to 1,000 personal letters. And a holographic film, you can probably get about 1,000 letters on one 35 millimeter holographic film. All these mailmen carrying all this shit around is all right within this system. But this system has fear. I don't want you reading my mail. Why don't you want me? Why is it that I don't want you reading my mail? Because when I write sweet nothings to my girlfriend and call it itchy coo and all that sort of thing, he said, hey, listen, but he's got an itchy coo letter too, you see? So the trouble is, we develop an esoteric language and we don't want everybody to know about it because we feel a little self-conscious and we feel dishonest about those letters. We feel a little ashamed of the way we write. So we have been brought up in a society that seals the mail. You know, you bring up kids in a glass shit house, you know, when it's all glass and all the toilet bowls of glass and the turds of photograph while they're coming out. There's no kid that's going to be self-conscious. You know what I mean? This kid could shit in a glass bowl on the stage of the Shrine Auditorium. It wouldn't bother if he's brought up that way. And we keep saying, is there nothing private? You know what I mean? And certain things that should be private, we all feel. Well, you know, when you go to a doctor, he looks up your asshole and says, how long you had that green blotch under your tongue, you know what I mean? Then he looks in your asshole and says, my God, that's a nasty cyst. Then he looks into your vagina, he sticks his finger up your ass for your mouth and presses your prostate gland. And all that area, you come in, you surrender your privacy immediately. Isn't that it? You walk right in, you bend right over, and bingo, your privacy is gone. Because we accept yielding our innermost concept under certain circumstances. If you know, then, what I'm referring to, when we use the word in the future, people keep asking us these questions, what about privacy? Will it be sacred? Well, that's a strange question because the people of the future don't have the same concepts. And all I meant to say now is that we do yield our concepts of privacy. Is there any question about that aspect? Now, there are some women and some men that have been able to do this. They've been able to appear on television, I'm talking about young women, and there's a doctor lifting up their tit and squeezing it to show you how to detect cancer. There's a public film that goes on. Well, in that area, the person will be respected a great deal. But if you just display your tits, it's like that. That's pornography. You see what I mean? All right, now, the whole idea, I can sit back on a chair and show you my pile-laden asshole for a medical magazine, but not in Time or Newsweek. On the cover of Newsweek, it becomes something else. But I think that the Newsweeks of the future will have whatever they need to have on the cover. I don't think anybody will say, my God, get a load of this shot. I don't think anybody would pay attention to it, because doctors don't. If they're in it long enough, you know. Maybe in the early stages there's some reaction. So privacy, revealing your innermost and most private thoughts, people had abused in the past. I mentioned this before. I mean, if you told me your father was a habitual pickpocket and spent 3 years in prison, and you just matter of fact tell me about your father, it is that sometimes when Richard annoys me, I go out and say, well, you know, that guy his father was a pickpocket. And so I use it against him. That's why we do not reveal our innermost secrets, because people that we've known abuse that. But the future people will not be like that, and therefore there'll be no need to cover yourself when you run across the room nude, you know. People do that. And so you got to remember where it comes from. And when somebody says, will there be any privacy in the future, I always say the utmost. Now, here's what that means. It means, privacy means that no one will invade your personal life nor abuse you. But whether they can see your ass hanging out or not, they don't give a shit. If you run through the room with your ass hanging, nobody cares. Because they're not brought up to comparative anatomy. Because in Italy, they don't say, look at the size of that guy's nose. You know? In other words, they don't place a priority on that. So the future will not place a priority on those things. So the thing that you've got to understand, in order to operate any kind of a system, you have to control all those variables. If you bring in to a system the concept of privacy, then you talk about where the concept of privacy is to be violated. Well, then you get into the rights of men and the rights of individuals. You get into law. Then you get into psychiatry. The psychiatrist says, you ever piss in bed or shit in bed? He does it many times. Did you ever take fecal matter and rub it on a mirror when you were in school? You know, whatever the hell it is. Is that a private question? Well, no, the guy was visiting a psychiatrist. Now, he says, is a psychiatrist a man's best friend? He says, no. The psychiatrist will write about you taking fecal matter and putting it on the mirror, only says you rippity sneeze or Client D used to rub in the Journal of Psychiatry. So you run into a lot of problems on exactly what is privacy. And if there's a file on you, and the police have a record of your lousing up an area, then there are employers that can get that kind of information on you. I think they can just about get any kind of information that you've ever released on yourself, anybody. So it's a great idea to release a lot of misinformation on yourself. I think it's a great idea. I used to do this years ago. I used to tell a guy that I'm very much interested in the Nazi Party. In fact, I've been to many American Bund meetings. This is true. And I've been to communist meetings, socialist meetings, and I've been to the atheistic groups, the free thinkers, the Unitarian Church, the Jumpers for Jesus. And the guy said, what are you interested in? And so if you do that, you get them loused up real bad. Because in your record, it says that, you have sympathy for criminals, you don't recognize murderers, and in some instances, you despise murderers. Get it all out, every which way, and they don't know where to find you. They really don't know what to do with you. Either you're such a free thinker, or you're not a person with convictions. And that becomes very difficult in a fascist state to identify you. If you can speak out in many, many ways about many things. If you can say, I think fascism had some excellent points, and some old Jew stands up and says the way they packaged food was terrific. And he keeps listening for you to come at something related to the Jewish people. Do you see that? And he doesn't hear that. And he sits down. Then you say, and I like what they did in relation to the Negroes. The colored man stands up. They found out that the melanin can reflect a certain amount of light within a certain amount of time. And whereas a white man, if you didn't think, nobody gets mad if you talk about that kind of thing. All right, so the idea is to learn not to be classified, because a lot of people would like to classify you. All right? So you belong to an organization called a non-classified organization. So you're not classified as anything. All right, we get through the systems approach again. We come into the question which you're bound to run into at schools or any place you're at in the future during the innovative periods of our social development. They're going to ask you this question. What will the rights of an individual be? And the question really is, what can the rights of an individual be? And what they call an individual, what can they be? He says, suppose I want to fly around the world at 40,000 miles an hour in a space capsule. I'll say, well, let me tell you how many space capsules there are and how many people would like to do that. And so, if you apply for it and you're capable of standing those forces, it will take about 11 years to get to that point. You see? So, there are certain things that you can't do within the limited state of technology. But as you go on into the future, almost any request can be fulfilled. But I wonder if you're able to accept the idea that privacy might be eliminated because at present it could be a dangerous and an embarrassing thing. I also mentioned in a sane society, if and when we ever attain world government without any kind of technical elite or people under special privilege, only at that time do I believe that everybody's fingerprints and everybody's identification should be filed in some central bureau. And like I said, that little button that you wear when you go into the library, it records your entry at a given time. When you go to the barber shop, wherever you go, it records your entry automatically. So when somebody accuses you of having pushed some little child into the river or something like that, there's no court of law. They just press recovery of information Wednesday, 4 o'clock. This is you're at the music center and the guy's out. No more witnesses, no more of that shit. So there are many ways to identify a person. Not only that button, but facial scanning, weight as you step on transducers. There are many ways. Color of the eyes, solid image of the head. So they will do multiple scanning just in case there's some indication at the medical center that your brother-in-law needs a transfusion or somebody close to you. They can touch with you instantly because you're known. Wherever you're at, it's always known. Now, Richard might say, well, just a minute, I don't want that much surveillance. I would rather just be an individual and be able to get lost occasionally. Well, we like the idea of you walking through the woods with a small telecommunicator. So if you go down in a cave exploring and nobody knows where the hell you're at, they just tune in on that frequency and they can tell you fell into a cave or you're drowned in a lake instead of half the community looking for you. This is the reason. And the only reason I approve of that kind of surveillance would only be under world government, only after all of the resources of the earth belong to everybody, no private ownership, no position of differential advantage. Until that day, I would be very much against any surveillance of anyone. I would distrust it. I'm just giving you my views in that area, and I'd like you to understand under what conditions surveillance would be part of a systems orientation. Any questions there? There may be some questions that bother you. Okay. You permit surveillance of your body because you trust the intent. Let's assume you trust the medical profession, more or less. And you trust an engineer, a mechanical engineer, analytical engineer, when you bring a drawing of a bridge to them there to do calculations on stress of curved surfaces and whatever the hell, you trust or accept their ability, and so you don't have any problem about opening the blueprint, having it checked. You trust the test pilot to fly an airplane that costs you $5 million or $10 million a bill, or you accept. And so when you go to a doctor and he gives you a physical exam, he's not a member of the Nazi Party or anti-Irish or anything in particular, you trust the intent of the medical group. There's only one slight area, whether or not you have enough money in the bank to back up a total examination. Now, when are you going to get that kind of attention that a neurologist gets if he collapses in the hospital? Something special happens. They clear the area, pick up the phones and go through, clear the operating rooms and wheel them in and hold back other things, which I don't like at all. Which to me is against everything, as I understand, the democratic system to be. Because after all, he is a neurologist. And that I don't like. I don't like the idea when the executive's son trips down the stairs in an industrial plant and everything comes to a halt. Do you think you know what I mean? That is antisocial. We must get away from that. If that does occur, the special effort is made. The only conditions for special effort is this: if your existence and several 100,000 people out there depend on some state-of-the-art that you've developed that can perpetuate their existence, until that can be duplicated in a computer, your methods of diagnostic work, let's say Paulette is the best neurodiagnostician in the nation at a time. And we say to Paulette, we show her thousands of shots of the cranial plates, brain topography. Say, how do you diagnose that? He says, that's a tumor of the temporal lobe, probably of this duration, etc., affecting areas of the spinal cord. In other words, they give you a thing and they do a readout on your diagnosis of it. They show her every known condition, photograph of the top, the side, infrared photography, everything. So she diagnosed, sits there all day long diagnosing these conditions and contradictory points. What else could it be? You see what I mean? Then we call in other specialists, top people, and they diagnose it. And all this poor bastard does is stand in front of an x-ray machine. The screen is run and it's scanned and compares to the... In other words, don't forget, when the diagnostician looks at the cranial case, whatever these white spots are or pressure points that he gets in a readout of infrared or pressure transducer, whatever he gets, he interprets by light and shade. And so while he's interpreting, and the scanning device which he's using is on that area, you understand me? Or that area, and it says certain words regarding peripheral changes in the brain, everything he says is picked up, or she says, and recorded, and so that in the future, every person has to say that, and they'll get the work of the best diagnostician. The reason for that is if we don't do that, he says, I think you go too far. If we don't do that, then the chief medic is going to get attention when both of you fall down the stairs. You're going to have to lay in a stretcher in the corridor while the experts work on her. This is why, if you keep asking, why do you keep talking about technology? What about people? If you don't build a technology, then there'll be abuse amongst people. I don't give a shit how angelic the intentions are of the leaders, of the would-be leaders. Our job then is to phase out the need for corruption. I'd like you to understand that. Now a person says, well, will the early stages be corrupt? It'll be as corrupt as it can be until you get to that phase. And everybody has any difficulty with that? Because Albert Berg says, if enough good men do nothing, society will collapse. Well, there is no such thing as good men or women. There are some people who are idealistic, but an idealistic person has preferences, which is dangerous. I know this. If all of you girls in the room tripped and fell, I'd have to try to get you all laying across an operating table and wheel you out, and the pig might be mad because I didn't put her on the table first. You see what I mean? And so he could say, just a minute, handle her gently. He gives his wife special attention. You understand? And so we have to work out methods that phase out the need for corruption. So when you ask me the question, how sane will the future be? How heavily monitored? In order for you to know whether an airplane wing is going to come off, you would like to know that. You got to have monitors in that airplane wing that give strain feedback to the pilot. And it says pull out in the next 500 feet. And if the pilot doesn't, he doesn't, for whatever reason, automatic controls pull out in the next 500 feet. Is that clear? That's called redundancy. Now, if you build airplanes like that, and you got some nut in that plane that's angry at his brother-in-law, he's going to dynamite the plane, how did the nut get on the plane? Now, the question then comes in, does everybody have to be monitored? No, they don't. But what do you want? You want a world in which no one can throw a bomb in your railway station? No one can throw your kid out of the window in rage? You have to monitor people before they even move into the city. You know what that means, monitor them? What are your values? How do you feel when you get angry? Do you want to kick a hole in the door? And if they are like that, they have to be helped. But they just can't get in an airline. A lot of people think in the future, like I always say, you can go any place you want to go. You can go any place you want to go if you qualify. No. That has to be. Now, and fight back if you have anything you want to fight back. You keep telling me you'd like to see a world where there's no corruption, nothing. Well, if you don't monitor people, then for no reason at all, some guy come over to you and stab you in a bar, just run a knife through you, because he thought you were somebody else. And he says, that's ridiculous, the man's insane. Well, he's insane too to say that, because if you don't monitor things, nothing can happen. Now let me give you one good argument for it. Here's a missile about to go to the moon, you know. Fuel pressure, check. Servo systems, operative. One way down the line, you ever notice that? Weather conditions, turbulent air. Now also, some of you are not familiar with this. When they launch a rocket in the early days, they launch it straight up, they used to launch a bunch of what you call skyrockets with it, that laid a white smoke screen. And also when they blew the atom bombs, it was a bad drawing of an atom bomb, they used to launch a lot of white smoke streams rocket craft up there. How many of you ever saw those? And that's to show the pressure, the shock wave, all of these streams to be deflected, to show you where the main blast is at different elevations. See? Now what are they trying for? They're trying to understand a whole array of phenomena at the same time. The more they monitor, the more they can predict. Now some of you probably didn't know this. In the South Pacific, in some of the atolls, where they built a tower, looked like an oil well rig with a nuclear weapon here, they also had war tanks there with no one in it. And they had brick houses with cows and sheep in it. Behind the house, in front of the house, did you know that? Hundreds of sheep at different distances with glass. Then they had movie cameras with lead shields on them, right on the sheep's ass and back and head and on the walls and everything else. A lot of movie cameras, which were servo-operated and lead shield systems. And when that blast went off in slow motion, stopped frame, they'd show that sheep turn into a sheet and vaporize. Anybody ever see these military films? They're fascinating. And the sheep would be, his impression would be vaporized right against the wall of the building. You ever see that? Like a shadow? And then they'd show a cow going just disintegrating, bloop, right into nothing. Now, they want to know at point zero, and they want to know what happens at different distances from the blast. And the only way to do that is surveillance. Now, if you've got headaches, unusual ringing in your ear, and instability when you walk, a tendency to drift occasionally, they do all kinds of photographs. That's surveillance of the system. Now, the only reason they say when you're all right, the guy walks out of the building and drops dead 3 days later, is because the surveillance system is not that comprehensive. All right? Now, again, let me say, I completely distrust all kinds of surveillance systems except a medical, and even that. It depends on your income and all that sort of thing, which is not very good. I distrust sometimes a medical decision, well, I think we ought to operate, because they find that a great many operations are not necessary. I read as high as 75%. I don't know if it's real. But I've read that. And I don't know whether the dentist is doing a root canal job because he can use $1,500, or he's doing because you really need it. I really don't always know those things. and I have no way of knowing. And so, I said before, it's very difficult to trust. I'm not asking you to walk around skeptical, but it's very difficult to trust people in our present culture, because we don't know what all the variables are of the intent. And so therefore, we have to approach a system that is not operated by humans, and that there can be no vested interest, and there cannot be any private nations, and he cannot be in charge of the grain trust. And you can't be in charge of the public water system. No man can be in charge, or woman, of anything, or a group of men in a sane society. The system has to be monitored. All right. Now, these are the basic questions that are extremely difficult to answer on television. If someone says, will people be free? I think that's such a ridiculous question, and so simple, I always say yes. Now, don't say, what do you mean by free? I mean, unless you got a 3-hour program. The guy says, suppose I wanted to visit my grandmother, she lived on the other side of the mountain. Can I do that? You say yes. He says, what if I want to do it on weekends? And you can do it on weekends. Okay. If the hassle, if the question is so low a level of question, you see, the answer is yes. But if it's a question that says, in an energy determinant system, can you afford to meet the needs of a wide range of people, and how do you do that if you lack the facilities? You don't. He says, then people can't do what they want. You say, that's right. Until you can bring it up to that condition to permit people to do a wide range of things. So the first thing that any society does, a new society, especially the communist China, which I don't think they're doing myself, is a race toward overcoming scarcity and special emphasis on major energy systems. That's the first emphasis. And that was a story which I repeat now, which I'll give to you, some of you again. Somebody once asked some Russians years ago, I remember reading this article, why when you go into a store in Russia there's no combs and brushes and hair curlers, and in American department stores you got thousands of things. And you go to their stores years ago, there was just nothing there. And one thing that they found, when I say nothing, I mean relatively few things. They said, this is their answer, whether it's true or not, I don't know. They said, right now they're going for development of gigantic machinery. That means big machines 3 times the size of this room to make production machines. And that would take 10 to 15 years. Then after they get a bunch of production machines, they make sub-production and lay in railway systems, transportation systems. And then after 20 years, bingo, tons of goods will flow. So they say the reason people line up in Russia is because they don't turn out shit. Now this is their reason. So some engineer that I was talking to said he walked into a Russian store and he saw a cigarette lighter. He says it was an exact copy of the Ronson. In fact, when he checked the dimensions, the screw hole, the bore, the threads were exactly that of a Ronson. Only it said, you know, a Mosk cigarette lighter. And he said, why do you guys, your can openers and everything that you got are just like ours? They said, oh, because those problems have been solved by you. So we just copy them, and we put our engineers on unsolved problems. That's what they said. They said, why sit down and put a good engineer's time on a cigarette lighter? You know what I mean? When the Germans have solved it, and the French. So they'll make it. Of course, whether or not they are really that efficient in doing that, I thought it was an interesting answer, and it makes some kind of sense to a country that's concerned with getting major systems out. Now, the average person is mainly concerned with, can you get a comb and brush set? And some brill for the hair, you know, or face, whatever. And they use that as their yardstick. And when I visit a country, if I were ever to visit China or Cuba or Russia, or any of you ever get the chance to, say, where are your major power sources and what's your approach to overall production? Those are the questions. Don't go visit a little farmhouse with Comrade Jones and his wife standing in front of a new tractor. You know, say, what are your plans for the next 10 years? I don't want to know anything about your missiles or military movement, just your housing, general overall plan. See? And they generally show you that. If they get the feeling that you're not there to wipe them out, if they can trust you, they will do that. They'll open blueprints, they'll show you a lot of things if they feel you're friendly to them. But they do a research job on you first. If you write a journal, say, I've never visited those countries, I really don't know what their intentions are, I certainly would like to find out, and I'm going to print it as I see it. And then they'll take you around and show you. But if you come back and say, I saw nothing new, they didn't show me any prints, they'll never let you into that country again. but they tend to be very skeptical of anybody that wants to do an article. There's a lot of people who've gone there and they've done articles, and they photographed a lot of things, in the process of being put together. They photographed some old steam shovels in some areas and say this is what they're using, rather than the latest. Unfortunately, people do those things. So understand then what they call reordering of priorities. This is the term that they use. In our society, we have certain priorities. There's certain fashions of selling, and certain we turn them out. But the reordering of priorities means asking, what is the nature of mass transportation? How much energy will it save? Now, after you've asked all those questions, after it's built, will people like it? Suppose you build a super transportation system, nobody likes it. Then you've defeated what you set out to do. Because if people don't like it, then I would say that the whole concept of overall planning is worthless. But if you step into a train system and the seat's much more comfortable than your car, and you get there faster, at a lower energy rate, and you can walk around, see a film or read a newspaper in a sort of a, maybe a train shaped like this in cross-section, with lots of room in it. This is a side view, elongated cylinder like that. Telephone's accessible, it's quiet, etc. And you still want to get out and drive your car over bumpy roads, etc., all the conditions, then we in this system, if your intent is to get to a certain place, if that's your intent, then we say that's a neural lag. Is there anybody that's not familiar with that term? I'd like you to use it a lot. Hang on to it. Neural lag is a guy or a girl that goes through a pattern of behavior that's obsolete. In other words, let me tell you what I mean. Both wings are shot off the plane, and the tail is that way, and the guy is just in his seat, and he's still working control. That's called neural lag. And neural lag is when Japan lost the war, and a lot of Japanese families still shove yen under their beds, Chinese. Or what are the Japanese? They shove yen under the bed, and it has no value at all. Now the Japanese fellow they use for wallpaper is all right. But there are a lot of people, if something is rendered obsolete, they still hang on to it. I mean, absolutely obsolete. I mean, I'm talking about in a nuclear war, we see all the cities on fire, and people running and screaming, Wall Street's flattened out. There are guys that carry money bags in the street, instead of food and canned goods. Their priorities suffer from neural lag, you see? The only thing they carry is what you can eat and a radiation shield, or maybe an umbrella so you can keep the radioactive dust from falling on your head. But the money bags will not serve any problem. Because if you've got a car with gasoline in it and it works, and there's nuclear dust coming down, and you've got a fast car, and I give you $10 million for your car, you say, you just wait there with your money bags, all the bags, and you take off. But the idea is, you can't trade off former values. The trouble with a lot of people is they're not able to shift gears that fast. So in any emergency system, people will have neural lag. That means the behavior lags behind. Okay, all of us here have some kind of neural lag. And neural lag is when something occurs that you didn't expect to occur sometimes. It's that period where you come home and you see a bunch of firemen leaning against the engine, there's ashes where your house used to be. And people stand there like that for about 12 minutes. And then they look around. They look and they're confused. They don't know how to handle it. Okay? That's neural lag. And some people look at it and they say, walk over and say, what happened? It doesn't matter. No house. In other words, the point is, what can you do from here on out? Were you insured, all that shit, if this matters within the system. So neural lag is carryover habit patterns. All right, now then another question that people ask, will you be able to solve all the problems in the future? That's such a ridiculous question, the answer should be yes. Because if anybody asks such a ridiculous question, I think give them a ridiculous answer like yes. Okay? There's no one that's sane that will be able to solve all the problems of the future. People will be able to cope with a great many problems, probably gain more and more facilitation to handle a wide range of additional problems. Okay? And so with all the problems is quite inclusive and too general to deal with. But if you want to save yourself a lot of time, you have to think in terms of who's asking the question, how much time you've got. Another difficult question that we have is in systems planning, once you make a decision, or once a decision is arrived at, for building a transportation system across the country, and say Richard comes up with a new idea a week later, that would save that system a lot of money, what do you do then? You know, that they call the unforeseen variables that could occur in the system. Well, here's what you do then. Remember, any system can only work with the knowns and the probability of the next phase of a system. Now, we look at a system now in terms of the knowns. You set aside an area for regional transportation. Those are the areas. Whether it be magnetic linear trains, air flotation systems, or microwave conversion, energy conversion systems, you have to set aside areas of national transportation and communication, the movements of goods and services across the country. You set aside regions, like there's been a hell of a lot of snow up north lately, deeper than it's been in 70 years in some areas of our country, which means in the next month or so or two, there are going to be vast floods in those areas. Which has got to mean that, especially if we get a sudden thaw. And so that always follows. So we have to have regions set aside for flood control. Deep underground caverns. Remember the areas that they loused up in strip mining where they dug miles of land, goes down 200-300 feet, and they don't know what to do with it? There's a hell of a lot of water storage systems you can use that for. Underground industrial plants. You don't need to fill it in with trees. It's a great hole that you got there, man. And it's a great probable storage system for oil or other natural resources. So we don't find anything of waste yet today, because the future will love the mess, except where they dump the mercury into the sea, and we have to reclaim the radioactive material. So areas have to be set aside in probable regions of flood control. Rivers like the Mississippi have to be widened, straightened out, the tributaries redesigned to be able to handle the widest possible level of floods. So when I say areas have to be set aside for that problem, and then within that you work on a linear transportation system, whether it be suspended monorail and flexible elements that can be slid out and other elements shoved in, a very flexible kind of grid work. You think you know what I mean? Simplified like a tinker toy economy. Does it have no meaning to anybody? If anybody doesn't know what a tinker toy is? I think they may have had them in Germany. They look like yo-yos with holes in them. A lot of little round pieces of wood. And you get dowels and you stick them together and make all kinds of little structures like windmills by sticking a round dowel of wood into these holes. You ever see those? And you make little structures with windmills and wagons. All right. The tinker toy is a great idea. The tinker toy approach to industrial planning systems so you're not that frozen in your industrial equipment. Any questions about that? So a healthier systems approach is to merely set aside regions and areas for it and change those things. But if you already laid out the production line, the answer is tough shit. Because then if you laid out your mills to turn out a railway system, whatever it is, you go on with that system, and then you try to figure out how much energy it would take to tear it down, and how much energy would you gain if you put in the new system. Then you have to run that for about 11 years to amortize the cost of installing it, you know? But if new energy becomes available abundantly, then you can rip it up right away. If you got a new way of ripping it, say he flies over it or rides over the new laser beam that melts all that stuff, and he's got a conveyor to pick it all up, which uses much less energy than former systems, than general systems. You always refer to a general systems approach, which in that area is the latest technology for a given system. So remember that even if you come up with a new idea 3 days later, you don't have to change it right away. This is how you figure out whether you tear it up or don't, how much effort it would take. Now, there's another problem. The companies like IBM that turn out calculators, computing machines, they have a big production cost for setting up those machines. And if they don't know what the Japanese have, and they don't know what their competitors have in England and France and Sweden, they don't know how much of a setup to make because the losses are tremendous. If the Swiss come out with a new calculator that's small and does 500 different things at a much lower cost, that whole fucking machine has no value at all. If I would take that machine to Venezuela and say you can have it for, we paid 500 million for it, you can have it for 2 million, so whatever you want. Of course, in Europe, it doesn't even turn out a competitive product. It's only scrap metal. Because a thing becomes scrap metal as soon as your competitor comes out with something else. That's why a lot of big companies still hand wire a lot of machines into big calculators, because you don't know what the other guy's doing. They're not about to stick in $500 million on the production of a particular type of computer. But the little printed units are the ones that can change quickly. The printed circuits, the things we were talking about, the desk calculators, that can do all kinds of work. Those are the things that can be changed quickly. So you got to remember that in an overall world system, we don't need to worry about that. If Richard comes up with a new system or if Paulette comes up with a new system, the whole world is enhanced by the system we've got because it's better than it was. And we still go to work on your system. And then we make an agreement. We don't make an agreement. Running these problems through computers, they show you the state of the art of a system. Various approaches to the system on a chart. These are the flow line charts of the national production. And they'll tell you, if you go ahead and produce the system right away, what the probability is of a system superseding it in 6 months, 8 months, 9 months, and whether or not there'd be any validity to stand still or act. They'll only give you those kinds of probabilities. So it'll say act on the problem, because there's no vested interest. So I didn't want you to think that the future will be paralyzed due to the fact that there'll be so many new ideas. When will you mark something obsolete? These problems would have to be fed some computer that analyzes in the context of the total system. All right. Now, do you have any questions about this kind of thinking? All right. Then the real message is, overall systems is not to take existing machines and put them in a line, but to ask what the problem is and whether there's any other way of doing it other than the standard way. Should we fill Coke bottles that way? Or should we sink 20 million Coke bottles in a swimming pool full of Coke? Or should we put them in a centrifuge and flash the fluid into them under pressure? Or should we deliver them under the fluid on the conveyor line? And does the conveyor line contaminate the fluid? Would it be cheaper to have flow lines from a big tank into the bottles? Or would it be cheaper to move the bottles into the big tank? Or would it be cheaper to move the bottle to a vacuum chamber, turn them nose down into a big tank, and have them suck up the fluid? Do you know what I mean? Rather than have line. Now, all of these can be determined by energy determination systems. So, the future, you can't point to the exact shape of the future. You can only point to probability. And so all of the old cliches about how long will people live, how safe, how long will people live. I'm not interested in the average lifespan. I've never been interested. I'm interested in how long I might live. If you tell me in the Blojo Islands people live to be 99 years old or 142, and he said, great, I'm going there. But if you do a probability study, he lived in a smoke environment, he worked in an asbestos plant for 3 years, all you don't want statistics. Statistics, in many cases, are terrible in a free enterprise system. You know, if his plant earns $27 million this year and he earns $1.50 a week, they average the average income into everybody, you know. And every American has $63.40 a month to spend on luxury items. This isn't so. Well, that kind of statistics is practically worthless. And the kind of statistics we want is where a guy comes over and tells you what you can have next year. Now, what you can do next year, what the training opportunities will be, and how much available energy there'll be to you next year. And statistics will only be for maintenance flow lines of the total system, not for public release, which you can't do a fucking thing with that. And the only thing is that you don't want to know that next year 830,000 people all over are going to die of a heart attack. All you want to know is that changes in your diet that are automated by the food censoring systems that change diet and minimize the probability of everybody getting a heart attack. Because instead of leaving it up to you, you can go out and buy ice cream at any store and it doesn't have artificial sweetness, nor does it have sugar. But it has another process that simulates sweetness that doesn't hurt you. So what you want is to take their fucking statistics and convert it to some method of alleviating the probability of your injury. Or somebody clubbing you, or stabbing you, or robbing you. You don't want to know how many crimes are committed every month. All you want to know is what methods of prevention have been installed and what effect it's going to have on you in the future. Now, statistics on crime is a bad thing because it depends if you live in the middle of suburbia or you live in an apartment house downtown that has special guard duty and a moat all around that apartment house. And you come into the office and want to see Ripley Sneed, the guy picks up the phone. He calls Mr. Sneed. Gallagher wants to see you. Is that right? If you got a voice, no, I never heard the sound of it. Well, but you don't even get into the building. So you don't want a fucking statistic about how many people are clobbered every year. All you want to know is what anti-clobbering methods can be installed in your life. So what we get concerned about, I don't know if you know how much the government spends on this kind of bullshit. Prison riots, farting on the walls of the prison. Nobody gives a shit. There are 8,433 newsboys that throw pencils down the sewer every year. So what? No, there's what we call essential, related correlative statistics with the future concerns itself with. Now, as you know, your Senate, and your House of Representatives, and Congress, they have a lot of information that they have printed out to give the illusion that they're working. And they mail out, they got the library, thousands of papers, whether the green-eyed flies in Malaysia drop 40,000 droppings a year in a given area. They get tons of shit. The bats of New Zealand and the disease of the upper mandible over a period of 30 years. Nobody gives a shit about that. Now that belongs to the Department of Entomology, you know, correlative diseases and stuff like that. And only if there's a spread of bat fever all over the world, you see, if there's any threat. So I would say that the kind of statistics of the future will be more related. There'll be a hell of a lot of it done, but not on paperwork, on automatic recall readout systems. Well, that's it for tonight. Shall we go for coffee?
Very good.